Kitum Cave. In January of 1980, a 56-year-old French engineer living in Kenya visited Kitum Cave, a massive cavern in Mount Elgon National Park. The cave is famous for the elephants that venture deep inside to mine salt deposits from the walls with their tusks. But the cave is also home to massive colonies of fruit bats and centuries of accumulated, dust-dry bat guano. A week after his visit, the engineer developed a headache, which quickly progressed to a fever and uncontrollable vomiting. His connective tissues began to dissolve, and he bled from every orifice. He died from what was later identified as Marburg virus, a close and equally deadly relative of Ebola. 7 years later, in August of 1987, a 15-year-old Danish boy visiting Kenya with his family also explored Kitum Cave. 9 days after his visit, he developed the same horrific symptoms as the French engineer and died from the same virus. 2 deaths, 7 years apart, with only one thing in common: Kitum Cave. The incidents sparked a major investigation by the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Scientists in full biohazard suits descended into the cave, sampling bats, insects, and the soil, but they found no trace of the virus. The cave's secret remained safe, and the mystery of how it killed remained unsolved. It wasn't until 2007, 27 years after the first death, that the mystery was finally cracked. Scientists confirmed that Egyptian fruit bats were the natural reservoir for Marburg, but the most terrifying discovery was how it spread. The victims hadn't been bitten. The virus was in the guano. The constant movement of animals in the cave had pulverized the ancient dry bat droppings into a fine, airborne dust. The French engineer and the Danish boy hadn't touched the killer. They had breathed it in. With every breath of the dusty cave air, they had inhaled a fatal, incurable virus. Bro, imagine dying because the air itself said, "Good luck, you little champ." Dominican Republic tunnel disaster. In July of 2015, a private company in the Dominican Republic hired 36 men for a dirty and dangerous job. They were tasked with cleaning out several long access tunnels leading to a hydroelectric dam. The tunnels hadn't been touched in 30 years, and in that time, massive colonies of bats had made them their home. When the workers arrived, they found the tunnels filled with bat guano, up to 3 feet deep. They were given knee-high rubber boots, hard hats, and shovels. For respiratory protection, some were handed flimsy, loose-fitting paper surgical masks. In the oppressive heat of the dark, confined tunnels, many workers found the masks too difficult to breathe through. Almost half of the men never used them. They seriously handed the workers paper masks for a tunnel filled with 3 feet of bat poop? That's like bringing a napkin to a hurricane. For weeks, the men worked in the sweltering heat, shoveling their way through 3 decades of accumulated bat droppings. With every shovelful, they sent clouds of microscopic dust into the air. What they didn't know was that this dust was saturated with the spores of a deadly fungus, Histoplasma capsulatum. Soon, the men started falling ill with a severe high fever sickness. Of the 36 men who entered the tunnels, 30 became sick, 28 were hospitalized, and 9 required intensive care. 3 of them would never come home. Doctors were initially baffled. They treated the men for leptospirosis, a common bacterial infection in the region, but the treatment had no effect. The men continued to decline. It wasn't until an astute physician who had trained in Mexico recognized the symptoms and the clear link to the bat guano exposure that the correct diagnosis was made: histoplasmosis. But by then, it was too late. The country had little awareness of the fungal disease and no labs that could definitively diagnose it. The delay proved fatal. Their deaths were a direct result of a chain of failures: corporate neglect for not providing proper safety equipment, and a medical system completely unprepared for the fungal killer lurking in its own backyard. Frio Cave Nightmare. In 1956, George Menzies, a 41-year-old entomologist with the Texas Department of Health, entered Frio Cave near Uvalde, Texas. The cave is a biological spectacle, home to one of the largest bat colonies on Earth, with estimates ranging from 10 to 20 million Brazilian free-tailed bats. The density is so extreme that the walls and ceiling are coated with 300 to 400 bats per square foot. Menzies was a rabies investigator, and his job was to collect bat specimens for research. He was a professional, meticulous in his work, and he was certain he was never bitten or scratched. Weeks later, Menzies began to suffer from partial blindness and convulsive seizures when he tried to drink water. On January 4, 1956, the rabies investigator died of rabies. 3 years later, in 1959, a mining engineer exploring Frio Cave for guano deposits also died of rabies, despite having no memory of being bitten. 2 deaths, no bites. This presented a terrifying possibility that defied everything known about the disease. To find the truth, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted a landmark experiment. They placed caged animals, coyotes, foxes, and cats, inside Frio Cave, in enclosures that prevented any physical contact with the bats. The only thing they were exposed to was the air itself, thick with the ammonia and aerosolized saliva and urine of millions of bats. The results were horrifying. Animals, including a fox and 2 coyotes, died of rabies. The experiment proved the unthinkable. In the supersaturated environment of Frio Cave, the rabies virus had become airborne. The sheer density of the bat colony created an atmosphere so contaminated with viral particles that simply breathing was a death sentence. The case of George Menzies proved that in some of the world's most extreme caverns, the killer doesn't even need to touch you. Python Cave Marburg virus. On June 19, 2008, a 40-year-old Dutch woman on vacation in Uganda visited Python Cave, a popular tourist attraction in the Maramagambo forest. The cave was famous for its massive colony of Egyptian fruit bats, which swarmed through the air and hung from every surface. During the tour, the woman had direct physical contact with at least one bat as it flew past, a seemingly insignificant moment in an exotic holiday. 9 days later, on June 28th, she returned to the Netherlands, feeling perfectly healthy. On July 2nd, 13 days after her visit to the cave, the first symptom appeared: a fever. 3 days later, on July 5th, her condition had deteriorated so rapidly that she was hospitalized. Doctors were baffled as her illness progressed with terrifying speed. By July 7th, she was suffering from catastrophic liver failure and severe hemorrhaging. On July 10th, lab results confirmed the horrifying diagnosis: Marburg hemorrhagic fever. The next day, July 11th, just 9 days after her fever began, she was dead. The source of the infection was the bat she had touched in Python Cave. Marburg is a filovirus, a close cousin of Ebola, and one of the deadliest pathogens on the planet, with a case fatality rate as high as 90%. There is no cure and no vaccine. The virus causes a cascade of organ failure and internal bleeding, leading to an agonizing death. The most chilling part of the story is that the danger was already known. A year earlier, in 2007, 4 miners working in a nearby mine had contracted Marburg, and 1 had died. 2 other tourists who visited Python Cave that same year also contracted the virus. For this Dutch tourist, a single, fleeting touch of a bat in a dark cave turned a dream vacation into a death sentence.